All right, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm sure that all of you by now have been to many a Zoom meeting, but I just wanted to walk through some Zoom etiquette quickly. It would be great if everyone could stay muted throughout the panel. That way our panelists don't need to compete with any feedback or background audio. And like I said, this is being recorded, so that also ensures that we have high quality audio when we share this in the future. The chat box is going to be your friend during this panel. It's a great tool. If you have any questions or comments while our panelists are chatting with each other or explaining things, please type your questions and comments there, and I'll circle back to them during our Q&A period at the end of the webinar. And this is also a great tool to show excitement and interest, but we just ask that we don't have excessive chatting, because every time something is submitted, it usually pops up in the corner of even our panelist screen. So sometimes that can be a little distracting. And again, I'll just say that this is being recorded. So we'll keep our cameras and mics off if you don't want to have a celebrity appearance on our YouTube channel. Great, and with that, I will introduce the Vermont Education and Environment Network and myself. I'm Sarah Hughes. I use she, they pronouns, and I am Vermont Education and Environment Network's Communications, Membership, and Events Coordinator. And I'm really glad to be here tonight. I'm excited about this panel and the expertise that our panelists are bringing. A little bit about VEEN. We are a group of individuals and organizations that are working together to promote high quality outdoor environmental and educational experiences throughout the state. So that looks like what we're doing right now, where we get some experts to share their expertise with the greater public or educators. We share resources. We have lots of different types of benefits that I'll get to at the end of this presentation. I'll speak a little bit more to our membership levels. We also are strongly committed to change. We're committed to equity, justice, inclusion, and creating systems of change within our organization. And we acknowledge that when it comes to this work, that we're not exactly where we want to be yet, but we're working on learning, addressing, and improving the way we move through the world as individuals and as an organization by engaging in active listening and learning. If you're somebody who has resources that you found really helpful in your journey to equity, inclusion, and justice, then please, I'll drop my email into the chat and you can send those to me, or if you have any feedback about today's webinar. Great, let's move right along. So our panelists tonight are some maybe familiar faces from around Vermont. We're joined by Emily Caplita. Emily is a teacher naturalist at Audubon, Vermont in Huntington, and she's the lead educator for forest play school programs and forest classroom programs. Her students are pre-K to 5th grade. She loves teaching fire building, so I'll definitely ask her to speak to that a little bit in a moment. And Emily is also a member of the Vermont Education Environment Network, and she is actually on the board as our secretary, so that's great. And she's currently earning her master's in early childhood education. So excited to hear your perspectives, Emily. And then we have Ariana Deharsh. Ariana is the director of Forest Preschool at the North Branch Nature Center in Montpelier, and she comes to that position with 8 years of experience working in the field of education. And you can find the forest play schoolers fully immersed in nature in all seasons, using the forest and trails as at their nature center as their classroom. So they're spending lots of time outside, and we'll get to hear a little bit from her about early childhood education and being outdoors. And then also from North Branch Nature Center, we have Amy Butler, who has been the director of education for the past 13 years. She also co-founded the ECO program and helped to start the organization's licensed forest preschool program. Amy is also on the advisory board for the Natural Start Alliance and Inside Out. And then last but not least, we have Ross from the Crow's Path in Burlington, Vermont. He's the youth programs director, and he's been getting kids outside with fire, knives, cliffs, sticks, and weather year round for 10 years. And he also thought it was worth mentioning that his dog Benito is marginally bilingual, which I love that fact. Thanks, Ross. Very excited to hear about your take, because I haven't seen many programs that do some of the things that Crow's Path does. So I think this will be really valuable for the folks attending today. So thank you all for being here. And we'll jump into our first question, which will give us a little bit more background on our panelists. This question is, what programs do you teach and what are the risks that are frequently involved? Do you have safety protocols to help you manage these risks? And we're going to start with Ross.
Great. So at Crow's Path, we do summer camps in the summer, which involve a lot of outdoor activities, anywhere from carving, fire, archery, even sword fighting and stick fighting, as well as just fully romping and playing in the forest, and a field school program that runs during the school year that offers a lot of those same, that full breadth of activities. We do non-risky things too, but I'll just sort of focus on the riskier things. So when we go out in the woods, I kind of differentiate between risky, inherently risky activities, and those might be carving, playing with fire, canoeing. And then something that comes up more and requires more nuance and being able to think on your feet is just the risky play that kids get really excited to engage in when they're unleashed in wild spaces. So a lot of times kids at school in their recess time, they're not allowed to throw snowballs. They're maybe not even allowed to pick up sticks because there's not enough people to monitor what they're going to do with those sticks. And so, and in addition to that, there's jumping and climbing, and we've got balance beams that cover gaps that are 5 feet tall. And so I kind of want to start on that side of things, where basically anytime somebody's doing something that elicits in me like a no response for a safety issue, and this is you oftentimes with stick fighting and snowball fighting, or wrestling, a lot of these big energies that come out in wild spaces, we try to pause the situation and find out how we can turn it into a yes. And so there's just a lot of improvising and a lot of adapting activities to make them safe. And I'll point out one reason we're able to do this is because we have a pretty good ratio, mentor to kid ratio. And that's huge for being able to safely engage in risky play and risky behavior. We do a 5-to-1 ratio. And so that allows someone to really focus in and to be a spotter, to be a supervisor, without taking away supervision, engagement, and mentoring with other kids who are engaged in other activities. So pretty much we're talking about like identifying the risk, and that, like, I'm just going to use stick fighting because it's so fun and such a go-to activity, to like slow down, use a slow motion situation, and to talk about like personal risk, and like a shared risk, the risk of hurting somebody else with that play. When we have snowballs, you always have to ask permission before you throw a snowball at somebody else, which for kids, upon introducing that idea, is like, what? I thought you just throw snowballs at people. But every week when the kids come out, we reintroduce the safety guidelines, and they really do it. They really say, can I throw a snowball at you? And we model that behavior and we role play it. And before long, kids, they just learn how to do that on their own, and they pick up the habit of checking in with each other, checking in with themselves, and learning how to do sort of romping, risking, wild play while keeping themselves safe, and in these activities, keeping each other safe. So I'm happy to answer more questions on that, but I'll switch briefly to fire and knives and some other activities. Especially with knives, if people are trying to get into carving, which I definitely encourage, kids love getting the opportunity to learn these skills. They don't have a lot of other places, is to have people teach it who are familiar with these skills. It's kind of a big, it's a big deal with archery as well. Being able to model proper behavior, and importantly, to recognize quickly improper technique and risky technique, and to have experience with a lot of like borderline techniques. So it just makes it really easy to establish firm boundaries to say, like, we're always going to sit when we carve. We're always going to shoot bows and arrows from behind this line. We're always going to have a safety circle, and we're going to put things in the fire and not take them out of the fire. So just being clear up front about what these safety protocols are um, is huge. And I've just been impressed again and again when kids show up with humongous energy. And I'm like, wow, are these kids really going to be able to handle this activity? Um, and to just explain to them what's going on clearly and calmly, and then to watch them really naturally swoop into having a really positive, safe experience because we've laid it out, we've explained why we're laying it out this way, and then to be there with them. So I'll leave it at that for now, and happy to take lots of questions at the end or in the box.
Thanks so much for sharing, Ross. Emily, go ahead and take it away.
Great. Yeah, so I teach a lot of programs at Audubon, Vermont, at the Green Mountain Audubon Center in Huntington. And the majority of our programming is all outdoors. And unless for extreme weather, but that kind of falls under our like safety protocols. So like risks that we take on a day to day, it obviously like varies with the season that we're in, but we could be like tromping in the Huntington River. We could be building fires. We could be climbing on rocks. We could be bushwhacking off of our trails. We could be playing rough with our group. We could be dealing with animals and like the wildlife that we could encounter. Over the summer last year, we had a black bear that kind of hung out in the morning. And so there are always these different challenges that come in when you're outside. And this winter, our beaver pond froze over. So we were on top walking on our beaver pond. And so like that ice and like making sure that it was thick enough is always a risk. But ways that we make sure that these risks are safe are when we are walking to different places, we always make sure that like our kids are in between adults. So there's always like an adult leading the way. So say, you know, you were to walk and suddenly there'd be a black bear on the path, like the adult would be the first person, not the child. That has never happened before, but like, who knows? Another thing is that before our programs, we always like walk our area and make sure that like there's no trees that look really iffy. We always check to make sure like if we were to go out on the ice that like an adult would go out and we would test it first to make sure that it felt really solid, and we would measure to make sure how thick the ice is. We also like have different weather and temperature conditions that we gauge for as well. So with like extreme cold, we limit our amount of time outside, but we still want to promote that activity and have those students experience that, because there's just something so amazing about a student experiencing a risk and them understanding it too. And then another thing, similarly to what Ross was touching on, is we always talk with the kids too. So if we approach an area, I never lead the conversation by just speaking. I always ask questions. It's very inquiry based because I want the students to be thinking about the space. So if we come up to our brook and it is just rushing down, I am not going to be like, okay, guys, like we're staying away from the brook. But I'm going to ask like, all right, like, what do we notice? Like, how should we be behaving? Because I want the students to really be guiding. And similarly, like with fire, I do a lot of fire building. I love fire building with kids. I think it's a wonderful skill for them to be able to have and gives them like such great power too, that it's just such a joy to see on their face, like when they've lit their first match. But you know, we always make sure that there's a fire circle around. an adult is always present, and we talk about that too. Before the kids ever start doing anything with fire, we run through like our safety protocols of, once it's in, you can't take it out. How to light a match, we walk through with every single student before they light it, how to light it. We always have tins that we use, so it's always enclosed. There's always something to put it out. And we talk to the kids about like, what can we use right here to put out this fire? And so I'd say like, that's a really in-depth conversation. So like the higher the risk, I feel like the more conversation you have. And even though it's dull and like boring for them, I think it's really important. And every single time, if it's the same group of kids, like my Wednesday program that I had, we built fires for 5 weeks straight, going over all the different styles of fires. And every single time we had a conversation about the safety of fire. And by the end of it, they were reciting back to me like to a T. But yeah, I think that's what I got. If anyone has any questions similarly, let me know. Happy to touch on anything more.
Great. Thanks so much, Emily. And last but not least for this question, go ahead, Amy and Ariana.
Great. So we have several programs here at North Branch Nature Center, both on site, and then we also partner with public schools to teach outdoor education at their school. And so they use, the school land or parks as their outdoor classroom. So, and that program is called ECO. And then here at the Nature Center, we have a licensed full-time preschool, as well as a homeschool and an after-school program. And those vary, our programs are for preschool through 6th grade, so many different ages. All of our programs are nature-based and nature immersion programs. At the preschool, similarly to what Emily was saying, we spend the majority of our time outside, but we do have an indoor space that we can use for inclement weather because we are full-time and licensed. So therefore, we're in constant contact with the natural world on a daily and seasonal basis. We have protocols that are shared among all of our programs. Teachers have knowledge of the protocols and have assessed the landscape and are trained in the protocols, and then we educate students from day one of each program. And also, like Ross was saying, we review these every day. Every time we're gonna, use tools or have a fire, we always review our protocols. So we have protocols ranging from going for a walk. We do head counts before we leave and when we come back. And we also do a safety sandwich with the preschoolers. So, adult in the front, an adult in the back, and the children are in between. We have protocols for boundaries based on where we are. So there were some questions about, being near a river. So the boundaries would kind of fall into that risk, as well as for tree climbing, fire building, tools, tick safety. We do tick brushing every time we're done with a space. So when we leave the forest, the children are involved in their own tick brushing, and we have a little song that we sing, and then as well as protocols for weather. And as an organization, as we develop and implement these protocols, we always differentiate between a risk and a hazard. And so Amy is going to talk more about the difference between a risk and a hazard.
Thanks, Ariana. And I want to just thank everyone for showing up. some of you have probably been teaching all day, have been working all day. And so I'm just really grateful that you're all here tonight. It might be warm where you are. It could be a nice spring night to be outside, or a snowy night, and you've chosen to be in here with us. So I really appreciate your time to be here. So one thing I would just want to preface this with is that navigating the difference between risks and hazards and supporting risky play in a completely outdoor program is more than a 1-hour webinar. So I really encourage folks to take a deep dive into this, and we'll be sharing resources at the end and, you know, through this. So just know that we're kind of skimming the surface tonight, and I encourage all of you to reach out to panelists and to each other too, to expand a little bit more on, oh, I think maybe having fires or using tools would be of benefit to the specific group of students that I work with. And where we always start, whether we're doing teacher trainings or bringing on new staff, is understanding the difference between a risk and a hazard. So Sarah, if you wouldn't mind showing that slide. Because I think, especially in this culture, in our culture here in the United States, our gears kind of grind in our head of like risk, hazard, because they are two different things, but they're two different things when we have knowledgeable, attentive, and caring adults who are with the children outdoors. Right, that's what differentiates risk and hazard. So as you can see, I'll just take a second for you all to read this slide. Because some of the things that we're talking about tonight are actually hazards. You know, the North Branch River here right now after a snowmelt or a big rainstorm can be a hazard to children if they don't have a baseline knowledge of what makes a river dangerous. Okay, some, depending on the age of the children, they're not able to assess. We can't expect a 4-year-old to assess whether or not a river is safe or not for them to be near. So that's our responsibility as the educators. Okay. Yet on a day when the river's really, really low in the summer and they haven't let the dam go, these are all things that we know as the adults, as the teachers, because this is our responsibility, is to keep our children and our students safe, right? Then the North Branch River can provide an opportunity for growth because we've assessed the river that day. Right? And we assess it with the students too. I know in Forest Preschool, they can see the river from certain spots on the land and they'll stop and they'll talk about it. How high is the river today? Why is it high? How fast is it moving? Would it be safe for us to be there? So constantly building the knowledge and constantly building the dialogue with your students all the time. To throw in fire as an example for that last part, when we have an element of control and children have a choice, when we involve them in the decision making around how to be safe around a fire, right? And that we provide that scaffolding for them and provide boundaries and provide routines of awareness and routines of being around a fire, then the children do have a sense of control. They have a sense of autonomy and they can make a choice. So this is a really fun graph to, you know, example to kind of play around with, and you can find it in the Nature-Based Preschool Professional Practice Guidebook from Natural Start Alliance. There's a whole section on safety in there. One more thing I'd like to add before we go on to the next question is, I feel like for all of us working with children, especially right now in the last couple of years, is that one way that we can really look at safety outdoors is by starting with ourselves and our own relationship to the natural world. And, you know, I ask you, how do you want to show up? How do you want to feel as a teacher each day? And how do you want to feel as a teacher each day in relation to nature? Because you may have a day when it's like it's cold, it's blustery, you didn't get a good night's sleep, maybe you had an argument with your partner or something, you're feeling down, and maybe that's not the day to introduce whittling peelers, like high grade vegetable peelers on green wood with your students, because that is a risky activity that takes proper scaffolding and a lot of focus, but you may not be the day for you to do that. So I always say, like, start with yourself and check in with your coworkers as well. Because everything's changing outside all the time, and we are changing inside ourselves as well. So one way that we can model safety with our students is by taking care of ourselves first, right? Like, put your oxygen mask on first and then focus on the children too. Risks and hazards, it's fun. It's a fun one to think about.
And if I can just add on to what Amy said, because I think that knowledge of self is so important. And, from there, knowing who your children are and what their needs are, what are they coming in with that day? It's great to check in with families in the morning. And then also, who the families are and what their needs are. And so, like, an example for me with tending fire, I know that I have experience with it and can maintain fire safety. And so therefore I feel comfortable with teaching it. I know that some of our students come with experience being around a fire, and some of them don't. And so all of them need to learn and practice fire safety, because it may be different than when they have a fire at home, so that we can have one at school. And then from this, we would educate families on our protocols so that they can feel safe with sending their children to us each day. And so therefore, teachers, children, and families, like, we all should have a shared knowledge of risks to ensure safety.
Great. Thank you all for such thoughtful answers. I know that this is really helpful. It's even helpful to me as somebody who's been in the field for 5 years. So I thank you all for your expertise. Moving on to our second question. What benefits have you seen come out of students taking new risks or learning how to assess risks themselves? And we'll go in the same order. So whenever you're ready, Ross.
Yeah, I was just talking with a parent after program today, and we were reflecting on their fourth graders' growth since doing our programs in first grade. And as a first grader, they were someone who was afraid of ladybugs and very quiet, and at times frustrated in certain situations. And now they are extremely charismatic and extremely bold and sort of rolling in bugs and worms and leaves and dirt. And the parent was reflecting on how a lot of that growth came from being out at Crow's Path, where they were able to push themselves slowly. And so for that student, a risk might have been holding a bug. And so there's all these smaller risks that don't even get close to being hazards, that are equally important, and are often the precursor to taking larger risks, like going over a high balance beam or climbing a certain structure. So there's just so much confidence that comes from this. And just another added bit is that kids have not a lot of room for autonomy in their lives in the physical world. A lot of them get their autonomy in virtual worlds. And so just giving them tools, giving them ideas, giving them social skills, giving them practical physical skills to go out in their yards and to do something is massive. And being able to take risks like getting wet, like getting muddy, like climbing a tree to a certain height and knowing that they're feeling safe. All of those just create a person who's ready to grow and be creative. So it's just huge. And it doesn't have to lead into mountaineering. It can just lead into being comfortable. So that's what I'll say about that.
Thanks, Ross. Whenever you're ready, Emily.
Great. Yeah. So I feel like Ross said two really big words, like the autonomy and confidence. Like I see when my students take risks that they are unsure of, or like when they really want to do something and, you know, I kind of look around and I'm like, all right, like you can go ahead and do it. Like their confidence level like rises so much. And when they get to like run and tell their parent or guardian at pickup time that like that's what they did, like you can just see how proud they are of themselves and how like happy they are. And so I think that that confidence is so boosted, and the students that have been with us for years too, or even just like a couple of weeks through summer camp, they get to grow such a great autonomy with nature. And I think that learning this as a child and like being able to take these risks now will help grow them into who they are going to be as an adult as well. And that then affects like our environment and nature too. And so I would agree that those are two huge things that come out of students taking risks and how to assess risks themselves. Another thing that kind of like just hit me recently was, you know, we had been talking with students about the types of play that we're doing and making sure that, you know, it's okay while you're playing to then realize that you don't want to play anymore and it's like getting too much for you. And so the benefit that comes out of the students being able to assess the risk and where they are is being able to like speak up and like voice themselves and learn them like from themselves, like where their levels are at. And, you know, all of our risks are a challenge by choice. So like we present it, and if a student does not want to do it, I'm not there pushing them at all. They don't have to do it, and we can come back to it another time. If they want to try it again, that is a-okay. If they never want to do it again, that is so fine. And I respect that so much too. And I think that being able to express yourself and then have an adult listen to you and respond to that is a huge benefit with them, knowing that their words matter and that their opinions and how they're feeling does matter. I think is a huge learning aspect that risk brings into a classroom, into my classroom, into just daily life. That's what I have.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, that self-advocacy is such an important point to touch on. When you're ready, Ariana and Amy, you can go ahead next.
Yeah, I think there are so many benefits to taking risks, like common themes, autonomy, confidence, and self-advocacy. Like, I think we're always so quick to call people brave when they do something really big and they're able to do it. But like, it's also brave to speak up and use your voice and say, I didn't like that and I don't want to do that again, but I tried it. And so I think those are some huge benefits that come out of taking risks. So we do have a slide that goes along with this, with my answer to this question. So Sarah, if you would be able to go to the slide, I think it's slide 3. It's a photograph of some preschoolers.
It's not the scaffolding one?
No, it's not. Yeah, it's the next one. We got our questions mixed up. There were
Oh,
only
that's
3
okay.
and we got them mixed up.
That's totally fine.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Let's skip ahead. We'll go to right here. Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. So I want to give you a little backstory, and then this will be a time for you to jump in and use the chat and respond. So I'll give you a backstory of this photo. This is one of our loose parts activities. So we have, you can see all these boards. The children built a bridge that goes over a mud pit that's about, doesn't look that high off the ground, but it's about, 3 feet deep. And they've had experience with these loose parts. We've had discussions around scaffolding, the safety for these materials. And so the children work together to build this bridge, taking turns building and walking over it. And so we have the 4 domains here also on this slide for benefits of risk taking. So social emotional, motor skills, creative spiritual, cognitive, or academic. And there's lots of skills within each of those domains. So for example, social emotional could be taking turns or self-confidence, like we were talking about. And so I want to know when you if you look at this photo and would like to share in the chat some benefits that you think children are receiving from this kind of play. So I'll give maybe a minute or 2 for folks to respond. Cooperation, teamwork. Yes, being tuned in and like self-aware and aware of others, to take turns, risk
Yeah.
negotiation, exploring imagination.
Yeah, I'm so curious, like, what was this in their world? Like, what were they building in almost like a small world with these big loose parts?
Yes, challenging themselves, and having support, creativity, core strength, balance. Yes, like having the bridge, a board fall off and then they have to try again, testing limits. Somebody's building the bridge on the left, as someone noticed. So somebody's using some engineering, building skills, and also it's fun. And they're playing and enjoying, and they're working together on these activities. So
Ariana,
yes.
I'm going to add a few more here, and I want to share with folks too that this is formally this is called a risk benefit assessment. So we do these with brand new risky play, risk type activities. We do this with our public school teachers, our on-site programs, and especially with a licensed preschool. We want to really understand what are the benefits here? So in order to communicate them with a larger audience, right? Because what we're doing is literally outside of the box, and we want to also be able to connect it back to either Vermont early learning standards or performance expectations, NGSS, Common Core, all of that, right? So this is a bridge, a benefit risk assessment, by looking at these 4 domains and then documenting what you're seeing students do outdoors, with fire, with exploring near a river, with loose parts, playing with sticks. more cognitive academic connections to this slide in particular. You have motor development and motor planning, which then also stimulates the vestibular system and helps strengthens proprioception. These are really big things when you're working in a public school and working with an occupational therapist. That's gross motor. As far as cognitive and academic, think of all the mathematical thinking that's going on here as children are estimating length, they're experiencing weight, they're looking at angles, they're looking at slope, right? So that this is a really great STEM, and it's really complex problem solving. And in the social emotional realm of this, there is so much social communication and turn taking that's going on, and some of the social communication that can happen for students, especially our youngest learners outdoors, may not always be verbal. And with loose parts, there's a connection there of students, especially with stick play, of students being able to communicate in an active way with their peers. Confidence through self-talk, sensory processing. So you can see in all of these domains, the benefits from simply using loose parts, which is really different than being on a fixed domesticated playscape at a public school where the parts don't move. So you lose creativity, you lose imagination, you lose fantasy play. It gets a little bit rutted out in that way. So we wanted to just share this way of thinking with you in a risk benefit assessment, a little more formal way.
Thanks so much, Ariana and Amy. And again, any of the resources that our panelists are mentioning, I'll make sure that I get those links if you're not getting them from the chat as we're going along, so that you have them all like in one spot in an email after our webinar. And let's go on to our last question before, oops, let's go backwards. There we go. So how can we help students build the skills needed to assess their own risks? I know we spoke to this a little bit, but I'm curious to hear more of a deep dive from each of you. Go ahead, Ross, when you're ready.
Yeah, Emily really hit the nail on the head in one of her responses, talking about an inquiry-based approach, which is being there to support the question asking process. Not only are kids going to tune us out if we talk a lot, but then they'll also just be reliant on someone else to give them the answer on whether something is safe or not. And so I like the teaching can come through the question asking, sort of leading questions at certain times, like, do you think this is rotten or not? Now we're bringing in the concept of rotten, and like, do you think the rotten one's going to hold our weight? And so instead of saying this is rotten, it's not going to hold your weight, you slowly bring in the concepts. And then later on, you see one kid talking to another one, like, that branch is rotten, don't stand on that one. And it gets sucked up really, really quickly. That's kind of the crux of it, really. And I think another thing is just having a diversity of experiences in different places with different materials. It all adds up and goes into the same risk management. And as they were talking about at North Branch School with the river, tuning into things that are not necessarily what the current activity is, but keeping an eye on it. What's the weather like? What does the ravine look like? What does the river look like? So that we know that those things are, those risks and those materials and those elements are still there, even when we're not intending to engage with them, because we might be accidentally engaging them at some point in the near future. So it's good to be just aware. So yeah, inquiry.
Great, thanks so much, Ross. That was so well said. Emily, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Yeah, so as I said,
Sorry about that. I'm just flip-flopping the slides.
It's so great. Yeah, I love to do inquiry based. I never give an answer. I always ask a question. So if we approach somewhere. If a student asks me a question about it, I then kind of ask it right back to them just to see like where their head is at. Another thing too that kind of touches on what Amy was speaking about is when we travel to different areas, they are different throughout like all of the different seasons. So in the winter, our river or our brook might be completely frozen, but in the spring and summer it won't be. So when we get there and we're able to cross it, since it's completely frozen, I then ask like, well, what's going to happen when it gets warmer out? And we discuss all of those steps. So when it comes to be springtime, we know what's coming for us, and we know that like, oh, like the brook might not be able to be crossed because it is roaring, and we get to talk about that before we get there. Like we're like, all right, how deep do you think it's going to be today? And then when we get there, we're able to see if like our initial thought was correct. So I think that it really helps build the students' perception of things and understanding what's happening in the world around them, and understanding like the concept of time and change when it comes to your environment as well. And so I think that by leading through asking questions, you really are helping the students build those skills. And also by doing these risks too, if a student like is saying no, that they don't want to do it, I always ask like, how are you feeling in this moment, so that they understand what they are feeling. So if they do feel this way again, they can understand and acknowledge themselves like, oh, like I just feel uncomfortable. And so they're able to recognize what those emotions that they are feeling too.
Great. Thanks, Emily. I mean, I even know as an adult, if I'm not properly taking care of myself throughout the day, not meeting my basic needs, then like, yeah, I'm less likely to say yes to that fun adventure that maybe somebody poses to me, or a risky behavior. So I think we can all relate to that. Go ahead, Amy and Ariana.
Yeah, Sarah, would you mind going back to that other side, the scaffolding side? So one way that we work with, our preschoolers all the way to our, third, fourth graders in public school to after school summer camp, is when we're about to introduce a new activity that has a certain level of risk. We use these 3 questions, and that italicized part that says outdoor learning can be switched out with sticks, for example. So we start with what is wonderful about, we do this with our teachers, with our public school teachers and anyone that's coming to learn with us about how to do this work. We talk about like, well, what's wonderful about outdoor learning? What's wonderful about going to the forest? What's wonderful about playing with sticks? So we start with what's positive. We start with what is the prior knowledge of the children and the adults that you're with, right? What's their foundation? What are their stories that they're coming with? Because some children will have positive experiences with fire, and some children will have traumatic experiences with fire. So it's our responsibility to hear their stories first and to gather those up before we move forward. So we talk about what's wonderful, and maybe you might talk about what could be scary, but to steer this in a positive way is then we say, what do we need to pay attention to? Or what do we need to be careful of? What do we need to be mindful of when we're using sticks? So just like Emily and Ross were saying, it's like, let's ask questions, right? Let's set the stage for children to develop a sense of agency, right? Where they are learning how to negotiate risk and understand the consequences, right? That gives children agency. So we talk about what do we need to pay attention to. And then the last one is, how will we keep ourselves, each other, and the land safe while we're doing this? How will we keep ourselves safe when we're using a stick? How will we keep each other safe when we're using sticks? And how will we keep the land safe or the non-human living things around us safe and cared for when we're doing these activities. That brings in self, others, and the earth, which is a really powerful motivator for empathy and for making really, really sound, wonderful decisions around risky play. It also brings in like an agreement, right? Like a culture around this, around how we can all move forward to do this. One thing that we do with these 3 questions is it's almost like a pre-assessment. We'll write down exactly what the children say about all 3 of these things. I don't change what they say, because sometimes what's wonderful about going to the forest, they don't actually know, right? You get crickets on this one. And so, or some students who may not shine in the classroom and have challenges in the classroom, academic challenges, you know, I mean, I don't want to sit at a desk all day and underneath lights all day either. They have a lot of experience outside, and this is a place where they can, you know, share what they know. And then what do we need to be careful of, or what do we need to pay attention to? Some children will say zombies. Some children will say.
Wonderful. Great. So we just want to open the space to have anyone have any extra questions, throw them into the chat. And if you have a specific question for one of the panelists, to go ahead and do that. If it's just an overarching one, we'll see if a panelist wants to answer it first. But you can throw in your questions if you have any.
I'm gonna toss, since I know Sarah said she was gonna supply people with resources and books, but I'm gonna toss a few books into the chat box here, some of our favorites that we've used over the years here, so that they're there for folks.
Great.
It's not a question exactly, but in the chat, someone was talking about bringing play back to the older students, which is something we do a lot of. We have 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in some of our school year programs, and we are really silly and really weird. And I just want to add on, anyone who's worked with kids knows that there's a whole nother social emotional risk assessment that is constantly happening with inter-kid dynamics. And then when you're doing that next to a physically risky thing, they just amplify each other sometimes. And so I really appreciated that last set of questions, what is wonderful about what to be careful of, and really emphasizing how to keep ourselves and underscoring each other. So many of our protocols were attempting to bring awareness of other people's feelings, bring awareness of being charitable towards each other. And I think that just brings a lot of trust and safety, which builds that social confidence along with that physical confidence, which then allows people to act more creatively and freely and to do weird things outside that they would never do in the classroom and would maybe never do even on the school playground, because that social safety net or that emotional safety net hasn't been established. So I just think that's a really important element to the outdoor work as well.
Amazing. Thanks, Ross. And then there was also, I just remembered, someone sent in a question too, that was, how did you become confident in leading students through risk? And so one thing that I know happened with me and how I became confident was something that I think, Amy, you said, is that like, I'm a confident fire builder. And so I'm then comfortable leading those children through that risk. So of course, I would never have an educator who had never built a fire before, like, lead a set of students through that risk. I would always allow them to develop that skill. So something that has helped me is like, if I'm not confident and comfortable, how do I expect my students to be? And then another thing too, which may have just been happening to me, but I had a student once when I went to a school for an after school program, beautiful sunny day, fell off of the jungle gym and broke their arm. Now that's a structure that they had been playing on all year for years now, something that they were really comfortable with. And so in my experience, knowing that something that was like in a school that can cause harm was there, that happened, allowed me to see that there is risk everywhere and it can happen. And, you know, the student got the attention that they needed to and are great and are like better than ever now with like the jungle gym too. So knowing that things can happen and there are sometimes things can be out of your control, but also always being able to be there to help them and caution them too, I think really helped me become confident in leading students through risk.
Hey, everyone, I'm sorry about my wonky internet, but I'm back.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
I would really encourage folks in response to this question also is to sit down with your colleagues, coworkers. What are your personal goals for integrating risky play and trying things new? And what are your collective goals as a school and as a team? And then start writing protocols in documents. What does this look like step by step? What are all the safety procedures? What are all the things that we want to do as a school, as a program, as an organization, and work through those and then practice those together. Like Emily can write the fire protocol for Audubon, Vermont, right? For Green Mountain Audubon, Vermont, and then share that. And so going through that process of conversation, collective, personal, and then writing it down, actually writing it down and having it something that you reflect back on. Is this working? Is this safe? How are the children responding to it? And you know, we have our own North Branch Nature Center protocols for all of these activities, and they're laminated and in our backpacks. So when we have parent volunteers, guests, and even with the children, we take them out. We're like, let's check on step number 2 for using our whittling peelers, right? Like there it is, and that has meaning, and it's something that we can refer back to. So that really helps with building confidence and getting comfortable.
I'll add to that, starting small and getting out there in with a smaller group for a shorter amount of time, because our approach to this work is extremely emergent. You're really following the weather, what's around you, the materials, nature, the kids' interests. And so stuff's going to pop up that you never thought to have a protocol for. We didn't think we needed a stick fighting protocol until kids love picking up sticks and we're like, oh, we need this. So just starting small and allowing yourself to build protocols for things as they arise. So then when you're out with a larger group for a longer period of time, you've already encountered a lot of these things in a safer, smaller container, and you're confident to handle them in a broader situation. I see one question here about how do you approach admin about a kid falling through ice when optically it's not a good look for the school, but when we look at the situation, it really wasn't that bad. We have a policy at Crow's Path. It's sort of like the kitchen table policy, where it's if the kid told this version of their story at the kitchen table and it sounded horrible, like I was carving and I cut my finger off, when really they just got a paper cut with a gentle cut with their knife. We really want to get out there ahead of time and explain what happened, even if things happened that were against the protocol for any number of reasons that this happens, and just communicate clearly and honestly as soon as possible before assumptions and fear can seep into the story. So it's really, to build trust, we really have to be honest, because things do happen. Kids fall off playgrounds and break their arms. Someone falls through ice and gets wet in the wintertime.
I think Amy also brought up a really good point in the chat of like understanding what's your water protocol to begin with. Like, what is your place's protocol, whether the water's running or whether it's frozen, and go from there. Also, whenever we do something or if we're moving, I typically tell, we usually have somebody in like our office building. And so if I were to go out on a big hike with my preschoolers, I always radio, letting them know where we are. So there are like multiple people that have an idea of what's going on as well. And then for us, which is different than with like a school program, but if, you know, we or a child like fell through the ice, like we would immediately contact that family and have them understand what was going on, to hear it from us first and like sit down and talk with them as well, and lay it out. And we have certain, they would also like have an incident report that we would have to file too. But it's best to just be upfront and talk about it like as soon as possible and manage the situation than if they were to come 4 hours later and be like, hey, so Bobby fell through the ice, we're so fine. I don't necessarily think that that's a great perspective to have, but I think that if you are looking at doing a risk, to make sure to assess it and have a protocol and have those guidelines laid out first, so you know what needs to happen in case something does go wrong.
Yes, and I think it all comes back to communication, you know, like communication between staff, with families, and so everybody's on the same page with the protocols. And I will also say from an admin perspective, like, and I'm sure your other programs do too, but we have a waiver that all families sign, ensuring that staff are going to do everything to ensure safety on a daily basis. We have these protocols we follow, but part of the nature of our program is that, you know, things can happen. And, you know, like you can get a tick from walking through a parking lot, or you can be on a playground and fall and break your arm, you know, like these things, they happen, even when we're working and doing our best. And so I think from an admin perspective, having a risk waiver is crucial, as well as the protocols.
Great. Does anybody have any last minute questions that they have for the panelists? You can either write it in the chat or take yourself off mute for a moment if you prefer to speak up. Otherwise, I want to be mindful of your time because, like Amy said, a lot of you are coming off of maybe a full day of teaching, and it's getting close to dinner time. So I'll just check the chat one more time. Okay, looks like we can move on. And sorry again about my internet, but luckily we have some rock star panelists who are just able to roll with it and keep going. But you know, we're in Vermont, so internet can be wonky sometimes. So I'll just quickly talk about some of the opportunities that we have coming up. We have a really exciting webinar from Rihanna and Kim, the founder of Love at the Roots. She does a lot of restoration work. She's a certified yoga teacher and does a lot of work in mindfulness, and she is an expert in trauma-informed education. So this webinar will explore the ways in which you know, trauma shows up when a student is attending school or an informal program like some of the ones that we've heard about tonight. And it really enforces how to build nurturing relationships with students experiencing trauma so that they do feel safe to show up in your space, what consequences can look like in this model. I know that in environmental education, consequences can also really be hard because sometimes you're seeing a kid for a one-off, if it's a vacation day program, or you're seeing kids one day a week and they're with a classroom teacher the other days of the week. So it can be challenging to decipher what actually is going to stick with them or not, and what's in your power to control over one day of the week. And that one will be a little bit more formal, but there will be breakout sessions and time for educators to connect with one another. So that's going to be on June 7th from 5:30 to 7. And the registration link is coming soon. I'll make sure that that's in our follow-up email in case that you're interested. And earlier I had briefly mentioned VEAN's membership. So we have a bunch of different membership levels. We have our basic one that just starts at $0, and it gives you access to promotional emails, newsletters, blogs, member meetings, networking events. It's just a really good way if you want to stay in the loop on events and maybe policy that's happening at the higher level in environmental education. And then we have some other ones that have like a bit more of a scale of prices. If you're a student, young professional, or early career adult senior, it's only $15 a year, and you'll get basic benefits and discounts on conferences, member specific resources, forums, mini grants, and monthly webinars. And that's pretty much the highest level of benefits. The other ones are really just if you're a more established individual in your career, we ask that, you know, a little bit more a year from you than somebody who might just be starting out. And then organizational members can have individual benefits for up to 4 employees, and we'll put your company logo on our website. And then those last 2 tiers are sponsorship levels. So these are more for companies, and they can give us a larger sum that goes towards webinars like this and helps us support our work across the state. And we make sure that your company's logo is present on our newsletters, webinars, and on our website as well. And yeah, just stay connected with us. We're on all the socials. So whatever your preferred mode of social media is, you should look us up. And this is our website, vtenetwork.org. You can check out some other events on there. We always list events that are happening from our partners. So you'll see some events from our panelists on there tonight. And yeah, I want to thank you all for coming and taking time out of your busy day to just talk about this. I think it's a really pressing topic, especially not coming out of a pandemic, but you know, the pandemic, hopefully, I'm going to knock on wood while I'm saying this, is slowing down a bit. And it's been a weird time for risk taking, you know, even things that we never considered risks all of a sudden kind of became risky behaviors. And a lot of the kiddos were stuck at home instead of outside and, you know, taking risks with their peers and learning from awesome educators like you. So I also just really want to thank our panelists for educating Vermont youth through some really strange, wonky years and giving them that outlet to have autonomy and take these risks and build meaningful relationships with you all. Yeah, thank you. If any of our panelists have something to add, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the work that you're doing and for attending this workshop. And I hope to connect with all of you more soon.
Great. Good night, everybody.